Hello, and welcome once again to the Secrets of the High Demand Coach. And I'm here with yet another high demand coach, and that is Mr. Ron Ross. Ron co-founded Avant with his partner to create a rich laboratory to tinker and to help clients solve their most juicy organizational challenges. I love that. With an inventive spirit and a knack for working with people, it's no surprise that Ron's career trajectory led him to consulting. He spent the last 20 years developing, coaching, and training leaders across various industries, making him an expert in how teams and organizations operate. Ron, I can't wait to dive in on that. I'm
Awesome.
just so excited about this conversation. But before we get there, I'd love to hear, just tell us a little bit about your story. How'd you get into coaching and why?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm gonna take you way back. It kind of goes back to I'm a middle child and all of the fun things that it involves. Two brothers, one younger, one older. And it was amazing to me that two people, three people in the same system can have different experiences. Always been a curious guy. I thought originally I wanted to be an engineer, an inventor, but I found my passion has really been about group dynamics. What
Mm,
motivates people, what motivates groups. I was a kid at home, chatterbox, talked all the time. But, early years, when I was in school, quiet, followed the rules. And I just noticed that a lot of people, how they showed up depended on the environment that was set. So I think that curiosity led to some, choices in my career decision. It actually started, I've always been, I knew I was going to be speaking and working with people professionally. I just didn't know how. So it
mm.
took me a little while early in my career. I was working in the insurance industry and people kept coming up to me, asking me, putting me in trainers, noticing skills in me before I really noticed them in myself. And when I started thinking about what I really wanted to do, I kind of harkened back to sort of what I'm curious about. And it started off way back in the 90s doing software training and loved
Wow.
the technology. And it was like, okay, I'm marrying, working with people, marrying sort of what I love, that curiosity. But I went deeper and started getting into, okay, how do you help employees to become better at what they do? So what started off in technology training became how do you teach people how to do customer service better?
Hmm.
And then it got into leadership development. And once
Wow.
I got into that, I did a lot of classroom training. And I wanted to find out the rest of the story. So classroom training is a beautiful thing, but you never know what the next chapter is. Coaching is more the long story. It's
Yeah.
the mini series. And so I invested in myself to learn how to coach, market myself as a coach. So I do coaching and consulting, and it's been really a good marriage for me so far.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I'd love to actually pause on that for a second because a lot of folks will either do coaching or consulting,
Yeah.
right? And for those listening, if you're not aware, traditional coaching is very Socratic in nature. We ask questions. It's built on the idea that you have inside of you everything that you need to succeed. It's just our job to help you mine that out. Consulting is a little different in the approach in that there's oftentimes more advising that happens. You will see it more often in a team environment. It's a little bit more advice and kind of knowledge oriented. And it's rare that we have someone like yourself who actually does both of those things, right?
Yeah.
And so what I'd love to hear, why is that mix working so well for you? And how do you show up differently in those two roles?
Oh, that's a really great question. Love that. I think for me, I was doing this work, um, doing it really successfully, working inside organizations doing it. I knew, I was going to launch out on my own. This was close to 2012, 2013. So I had a lot of experience that I gained on the job. And I went back to school. I'm like, I have to invest in myself. If I want to really know if I have the chops, let's pick up another degree. So I went back, got my master's degree in organizational development and leadership. And so I knew I was going to be consulting. Took a class in coaching and I was kind of blown away. And I had this sort of like fork in the road. And I remember talking to the professor who was teaching the coaching. I was like, do people do both? And he's like, normally it's one or the other. And I just knew for me, I was going to do both. So while I was finishing my master's degree, I also got my coaching certification. And I think it's the story I told you is I'm a curious guy. I like to make things simple for folks. So a lot of the work that I do is within organizations, but I also do things with individual teams within those organizations, and then working with leaders. And I just want to have as much leverage as possible. And I think that's why it really works for me. It requires you to be really skilled at putting on and off hats. And that's one of the things that I try to tell leaders that I'm working with is you have to be really good at knowing what hat the situation calls for.
Yeah.
When I'm actually coaching, I know I have to be my rawest, real self because I can't expect anybody else to be vulnerable, to really let down the guard if I'm going to do that. If I'm in the room talking to senior leaders, that's a different, more button up look. And that's a different hat that I'm wearing.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they don't want the Socratic method. They want, okay, what are you going to do? How do we fix that? So it's flexing based on the circumstances.
Yeah.
And I just love the fact that I get to do both. I really wouldn't change it.
It's so cool. So I actually do the same thing, and it gets me in all kinds of trouble with both coaches and consultants because, and I actually found, like yourself, it's actually very, very effective because there are different times and situations where the different style and approach is much more effective than the other. I'd love to hear from you. So let's say you're sitting down with a CEO, and they don't know if they need a coach or a consultant. How do you help them? Like, where is consulting more effective in your opinion?
I think consulting is effective when there is a huge group, there's a system-wide issue that you're really trying to address. And if I was honest, I think you always need a little bit of both. So, and that's really selfish. I think if I have a CEO who I know gets it, like they get sort of what real leadership is, they've created a really great culture. And the thing they're trying to figure out is how do I make sure that this is cascaded and repeated at all levels of my leadership? That's clearly a consulting gig. And within that consulting, there may be development, workshops, and coaching. But the frame, the lens that I have is, okay, I'm talking to you as that consultant, and I see what the real issue is.
Yeah.
Now, it may flip, and this happens a lot of times where I realize, okay, the CEO, the senior leader, the sponsor is not as good as she or he thinks they are. What the issues that I'm really hearing, it's really about them. And I need to be flexible and transparent and strong enough to say, part of this is about you. And we may need to get you the right skills, the coaching, so that you can do what you need to do. So, so it flexes depending on sort of, I might go in with one approach, but after really talking to the CEO or senior leader or sponsor, I'm going to flex based on what the circumstances really require.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So in my work, we kind of organize the world into different stages. And so you see something very similar to what you're talking about play out. Early struggle, trying to get the business up off the ground. What you're typically looking for is actually, you're not looking for consultants. You may be looking for a coach, but more often than not, what you're looking for is someone to execute with you, right? Some service providers, what you're looking for. You want someone who can do the books. You want someone who can manage your marketing, who can, et cetera, et cetera. And folks will actually overspend on coaching in that time frame because there's only so much. Like when you're the business, it's like having someone else to tell you what to do sometimes isn't all that effective. There's a place for it, but it's got to be the right approach. Step into fun. Business is doing well. We're growing. More often than not, it's a small team, and the biggest bang for your buck is to really invest in you as a founder, right? Invest in yourself because you are the biggest asset. You're also the biggest problem, right? Like virtually every single time. And so it's at that stage where if you can bring in the right coach who can help you work through those specific things you need to work through in that stage, it's like lightning in a bottle, right? It's just magical. Now, what happens is, a lot of the best leaders realize that. So they say, how do I grow? I work on me, right? And I grow. Now the organization's growing. It's getting bigger. It's getting bigger. We enter into this third stage called whitewater. And one of the words you used around consulting, which was just right on point, was systemic, right? We're now dealing with systemic problems that are happening across the organization. And you can work on yourself as CEO until you're blue in the face, but until you can get things working outside of you better, coaching yourself can actually make it worse, right? You can actually create a bigger divide between you and the rest of your people. And that's oftentimes where you see consulting really come into effect. However, the coaching doesn't go away, just like you're saying, because if you've got stuff that you're still working through and getting through that transition, it's there as well. So I love that you do that. Kind of enough about coaching or consulting and consulting. So tell us a little bit. What would you say some of the most important work you're doing with your clients right now?
I would say it is around helping them to empower their leaders. Is really like the fun work that I love doing, and I think because we have a company that I have certain expertise that I bring to the table, and just to kind of put it in perspective real quick, it is the equipping sort of the people that we've been talking about, the CEOs. It's their executive team going further down. Those are the folks that are they have the biggest lever in the organization. So we love to work with that leverage. So we do a lot of work there. And then that other thing, which I know you're aware of, is the culture, the container, the environment that they're creating. So you got to really do both. And sometimes it's just helping people to be real about the culture that you are in. Like if they have a talent attraction problem or retention problem, sometimes it's not that you have a real issue. It's that you're hiring the wrong people compared to the culture that you think you have.
Right.
And the culture that you have, say you have a really aggressive sales culture, hire people that are aggressive, salesy people. Don't hire people who want something different. So we see a lot of mixed matches there. And then the final thing you talked about, so that whitewater stage where they figured it out a bit. They know they're going to be in business. They're scaling up. We get to help them with what is that other thing that you need. So it's the guardrails around all your HR operations in the early days. Not as necessary if you have somebody that can do it, if you can outsource it, but you're going to need to build capacity there to keep yourself out of trouble, to stop spending money on lawsuits, stop spending money on hiring, firing people, and put in sort of the guardrails that really help you to really go where you need to get to. So that's a lot of the work that we do as well.
That's so good. And it's so timely for folks. It's interesting what you say about values. I was coaching one of my clients and had one of her team members just kind of went a little bonkers, and teamwork was a huge value of theirs. They talked about it day in and day out. And she just basically decided, I'm not working with the team. Like, you can have me, I'll do my work, but leave me alone. And I asked her, I was like, if it's not this, what would it take to fire her? Right? Like, what would it take? Because that's what your values are, right? Your values aren't what you put on a wall. It's not the result of a 2-day offsite brainstorming session, right? How are you? It's the culture that you create. It's the things that you communicate. It's what you compensate for, right? And when we can just settle that, I think there's a lot of pressure on CEOs to pick the right values now. There's a lot of pressure on leaders to have these really like nice, fun, fancy millennial values. I don't know what they are, but we want to pick the ones that sound right instead of the ones that are right. And so how do you help folks that are dealing with that, right? They're bringing in people that seem like the people that they want, but they're not fitting culturally. How do you help them get to the bottom of that?
Yeah, I think you just danced all over what I believe in a good way. So I appreciate it. It's like you're playing my song. So it is, culture really is not what you have printed. And there are companies that have beautiful wallet cards and values that are on the wall, but it's the actions that you take. It's the conversations that you really have. It's how you discipline, coach, or don't do those things. And as you said, the compensation. So it's mapping what your culture is, not what you say it is, but
Mm.
really what it is. And you
Yeah.
know what the culture is by listening to the conversations, by interviewing people, not at the top of the organization, but really at different levels. And really, if you want to know if you are a culture that really listens, that empowers people, ask the person with the least amount of power, privilege in that organization, and they're
Wow.
going to really tell you the story. And I'm not saying you have to be anything, just like you. Just be, communicate what you are. And if you're not being what you say you are, figure out a way to kind of reconcile that. And a
Right.
lot of times, like you said, it doesn't really require them to be different. It requires them to be real,
Yeah.
and to change those words, change those values, because there's somebody that wants to work in that organization that would love to do that work and does not want some of that other stuff that may be desired for other folks. So our whole thing is use culture, use sort of your leadership as a powerful, use your vision as a powerful magnet to really attract people, but it can't be BS. It
Yeah.
has to be really real. And one of the ways we see it is in the conversations. That just seems to be where people get into trouble. Leaders are promoted because they are really good technical leads. They were really the best, but they haven't really been equipped with those skills.
Yeah.
And that's where culture, even if the CEO and executive team, they're really embodying it, if they're not watching the conversations that are happening beneath, you're really having your culture really eroded. And I'll give you an example of that. This is not from my work, but it's I'm at an age where I have adult children who are in the workforce, and my daughter is working for, she worked for in, advertising and PR. And one of the values, and she's one of the millennials that you talked about, is work-life balance, big for that segment of the employee population. The tops, we are all about it. But the folks who are managing the folks at the ground level, they were undermining everything that was being said. Work life balance. We have Fridays where you have off, but make sure you check in and you're looking at your email all day. That's not off. That's actually working. So you have to make sure that not only you are actually doing sort of what you said at the top, but the folks beneath you, their behavior, the conversations, the messages that they're sending are really consistent. And the only way you can do that is you have to periodically walk around, audit that, do skip level
Yeah.
meetings. You have to be listening and talking to people, or you're not going to even get it until you start seeing the data saying, okay, I have a lot of people that are leaving. Now I have to do things like exit interviews. I think you can get ahead of a lot of this if you are being one of those leaders that are really paying attention.
Wow. Wow. So good. So good. I don't know how you're going to top that, but I got to ask this question because it's my favorite. And that is, what would you say is the biggest secret that you wish wasn't a secret at all? What's that one thing that you wish everybody listening today knew?
Yeah, I'm just going to make it simple. I'm in the process of finishing sort of a book around sort of some of the stuff that we're talking about, and it's all about creating that right culture in teams. It's about what leaders do, and I would say it's about the power of making people feel seen.
Mm.
And I call it noticing, but there's probably 1,000 different ways you can say it, and I'll give you some examples. Is noticing an employee that has a skill set way before they know it. So it's been like a game changer for me in my career. People noticing that I had an ability to really connect, talk to people, investing in me before I even knew that might be something I'm doing. Um, Calling out some gift or talent someone has, paying attention to the individual contributions that people are making. It's that ability to see what's possible, and then holding them to that high expectations of what you see in them is
Yeah.
really what I would say is the biggest secret. We all need it as human beings. We want that from our parents, we want that from our spouses and significant others, to really be seen, to be valued. And I think if leaders could do that, that to me is the secret sauce that doesn't cost any money. It just
Yeah.
requires presence, focus, and attention, and that's all free.
Yeah. And what some folks I've worked with have worded like, is it patronizing, right? And it is if it's not true, right? If it's not authentic, like this isn't something that you fake. But if it's authentic, right, and you're calling out things like when you talked about empowering people, I agree. Like there's just no better way of empowering leaders and calling them up. And then I love how you said, and holding them to those high standards. It's so good because it's not just like, oh, everyone, unicorns and rainbows and, like it's not that. That's not what an empowering culture is. It's calling people up above what they would do on their own and left to their own devices, holding them to that standard and doing it in a way that brings life and encouragement to them. So I love that. There's so much we could dig into there. But I've got another question for you. I'm actually going to switch gears. I'm going to have you take off your coach consultant hat. I'm going to have you put on your, your founder hat, if you will, leader hat, and talk to us a little bit about, because I know, we have a tendency as coaches and consultants to give our best time and energy to our clients, right? But can do it at the risk of just overlooking our own growth and changes. So what would you say is the next stage of growth for you and your business? And what do you think the big challenges you're going to have to overcome to get there?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm someone that has the gift or natural ability of foresight, which is like this knack for seeing what I'm going to need. I don't always have the ability to invest in it, but I'm just a believer in like I'm a lifelong learner and someone that's always going to continue to invest in themselves. I am always someone who is getting coaching, getting some type of development. And my partner, who happens to be my life and wife as well, she's a believer in that. So I think our next iteration is how do we build our business to a significant enough scale that we can like be a bigger help, not only to our clients, but to really serve sort of some causes that we really care about. And one of the ones that, really top of mind for us is if we are people who believe in organizations that should be diverse and inclusive and should really give opportunities to folks, and not just to talk about it because it's a hot thing. How do we invest in kids that are kind of losing out because of maybe where they started? So that's to us is like, all right, we have to put sort of our values to work, and it can't just be something that is talked about. But to really fund that means we really need to grow the business, and be able to add additional people. So
yeah, I love that. I love that. And what, this is a group of founders that are listening, so they're all like, duh, we get it. But what a lot of folks don't realize about founders is how good the heart is, right? Like we see these business leaders, we see business owners, they often talk the language of business, they function in that environment, they make decisions quickly, they're decisive, but it's really not about the money. It's not about getting rich, right? Like the whole kind of Instagram get rich thing is just not the people that I come into contact work with on a daily basis. The story that you have there that's what I see, right? I see folks who are wanting to create opportunity for themselves, yes, but so that they can give back, so that they can pour in, so that they can leave this world better than they found it. And so I love that you're doing that. I love that you were open and sharing that. It's just such a privilege. And I can't wait to see it come to pass.
Yeah, really appreciate that.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for being on the show. It was just such a pleasure having you. We could probably make this about 8 episodes and just keep going. But for the sake of time and for that of our listeners, thank you so much for being on the show, Ron. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Your time and attention mean the world to us. I hope this conversation was as exciting and stimulating for you and empowering as it was for me. I cannot wait to see you next time. Take care.